Reactive Training Systems.
Welcome to the RTS podcast. I'm Coach Mike. In a few minutes, we'll be joined by Coach Gaby and also Alexander Eriksson. Now, if you don't know, Alexander Eriksson is a high-level powerlifter. He's also a powerlifting coach. He is the coach of the 2024 Sheffield champion, Gustav Hedlund. Gustav, the 93-kilo lifter who recently won the Sheffield by breaking the world record total in the 93 division. It was just a phenomenal performance. Gustav is an amazing lifter, and Alex is an amazing coach and an amazing lifter in his own right as well. I thought this was a really excellent podcast. We covered all kinds of stuff from Alex's origins to what the Sheffield was like. We talk about training philosophy and specifically problems that were encountered in preparing Gustav for the Sheffield, what they did to solve them, and then what their strategy was like. A little bit of a play-by-play through their Sheffield experience, and even into some advice for up-and-coming lifters and coaches. So I don't want to make this too much of an introduction for you guys. I want to get right into the interview. I think you'll get a lot out of it. I would love to hear some feedback from you on this episode. So send me a message, send me an email if you enjoy this type of content and would like to see more podcasts with coaches in this style. So without any further delay, here's our conversation with Alexander Eriksson. Well, I do have to say the topic that is on everyone's mind is all about Sheffield. And
Yeah.
you
Was guessing.
both Gaby and Alex were at Sheffield. So I guess maybe that's a good place for us to lead in here is, Alex, from your perspective, what was Sheffield like?
From the 2023 Sheffield, I wasn't there, unfortunately, but I've heard it was quite an event. But I didn't quite realize the extent of it before I came to Sheffield this year. Just the arena and everything was so professional. But the thing that really struck me and like one of the strongest memories I have was when we started warming up. And it was like 3 floors down, and you were like, okay, what's that loud music and everything, and all the people cheering and so on. So you could hear that from like 3 stories down when we started warming up. So that was quite a feeling. It gave me a bit of a chill because you usually don't get that during a powerlifting competition. If you're lucky, people will shout like that for your third deadlift or so. But this was even before the lifting started.
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. So Gaby, did you go to the 2023 Sheffield? I don't recall.
No, but afterwards I really regretted it. So I was really happy to go there this time. And honestly, it's as Alexander mentioned it's crazy like how people started to cheer as soon as the lifters entered the stage because everyone was just waiting for like to see them. So we were all like really excited. And also before even they came up on the stage, it felt like a rock concert. So like you could see on the screen all of the lifters that are going to compete, and everyone was like, "Oh my god!" We were having goosebumps. Everyone was screaming so loud. Like the day afterwards, I felt it like I lost my voice. So it was insane. And also the competition at each powerlifting competition, it's really being stretched out towards the end, so that's how it felt. But still, towards the end, the energy was still there, and it was just crazy. Yeah, I'm really happy that I went, and hopefully we're going to go there together next year. So
Yeah.
looking forward to that.
It'll definitely be
Probably
easier
quite
for
a
me to
few.
get there.
Probably quite a few people that also lost their voice,
Yeah.
especially some of the Swedish crowds. I won't mention name, but might have been Gustav's girlfriend or fiance.
Yeah. I would
But I
imagine if
wouldn't be
there's a
surprised if
powerlifting competition to lose your voice at, it would have to be Sheffield, right?
yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was also the case for you because I saw also you like the way you cheered for Gustav towards
Yeah,
the end.
yeah,
That was really, really nice. I love those moments to see how the coaches react when lifters make the lift because like I can imagine all of the pressure and the entire work that you've been putting into this. Like it feels like a relief, right?
yeah, yeah. And I think sometimes it's a larger feeling when you're coaching someone and they are doing really well. You can't really do much other than cheer them on and okay, go out and do this. Like when you stand on the platform yourself, then like everything is within my power. But when you're coaching someone, you feel a bit powerless. That you want to help, but you can't do much else than just cheering them on. And that gets me a bit more nervous than standing on the platform myself. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get more into, your work with Gustav and, lots of the details around, what you guys do and what can be learned from that experience for the rest of us too. But maybe before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about you and your background. And I mean, you're obviously a high level powerlifter yourself, and you've been doing this for quite some time. And maybe a good place to start is around the beginnings of your powerlifting journey. Like, how did you get into powerlifting and what's led you to this point?
Yeah. And I think I've always sort of been destined to do powerlifting. Like when I was a kid, I was the kid that did 100 push-ups every day
Yeah.
before going to bed and so on. I always been really intrigued by physical performance and especially strength. So as soon as I could get my first like gym card, you had to be like 14 years old to go to gym in the small town I grew up in. From then, I've just been lifting weights and trying to get stronger. But at the time, this was 2008. Powerlifting wasn't as big there. You didn't have social media. Wasn't that easy to get into the sport. I didn't even know the sport existed until I was like 15, 16 year old. But as soon as I heard about the sport, it was quite obvious that this is what I want to do. So I've been competing ever since 2011. So it's almost 13 years, almost half of my life.
Do you have any idea? Like, I relate to that a lot. Like this, you were talking about doing push-ups and stuff in the beginning. That's similar to how I was before I got into, even lifting. Do you have any idea why that was interesting to you?
Well, not really. I think I've just always I've been intrigued by strength and like physical performance.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It's probably was born with me that feeling that I want to get stronger. But also I
Okay.
like to sort of figure out how things work, how you get really good at things. I think that goes a bit hand in hand with powerlifting because it's very easy to measure. It's easy to build processes around. It's easy to sort of plan your performance and plan your progression compared to sort of other team sports and so on. So
Yeah.
that's something I found interesting as well.
Yeah. It's similar. I mean, I've thought about this a lot, and for myself at least, the only thing I could think of that might be it is like I remember as a child, you get told like, eat your vegetables so you can grow up and be big and strong. It's like being big and strong was always the goal.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I could think of. Anyway, so that's I think a origin story that will sound familiar to a lot of people, and then like as you go, you compete and you rise through the ranks. When would you say it like really got to another level for you, like in terms of your seriousness around the sport?
Even before starting powerlifting, I took training very seriously. I didn't know what I was doing, but I really enjoyed training and I put a lot of time and effort into it. So I had sort of that mindset of being serious from start. And as a kid, I did wrestling as well. And within wrestling, you don't put much thought into it. You just train hard. That's sort of the training approach, and that I brought that with me into powerlifting as well. It was very good in one sense, but of course you can't just train hard. You have to train smart as well. But I think quite soon after I started lifting, I won like the sub-junior nationals, and it started to realize that I was quite good at this. And I got to go to sub-junior worlds, where I realized that I probably wasn't as good as I thought I was. Because I was quite strong, but didn't perform on the platform, and I didn't achieve the weights I wanted, and I didn't achieve the placing I wanted. But I just continued from there, and grew as a junior lifter as well, winning the junior equipped worlds twice. Because then pro lifting had just started, and during my final junior year, I won. I both broke the equipped total world record and the raw total world record during that year. And shortly after that, switched to just doing classic lifting because that's where the sport is growing, and I want to go up against the best. So that's where I'm at now.
Yeah. And you've been, plugging away and getting stronger and continuing to compete at a high level ever since.
12 years since my first international competition, so it's been quite a few years.
So that's a good framing, which 12 years is it's a lot of time to invest, but then also like to put in context that you're coaching at the level that you're coaching at 12 years after competing for the first time. That's very, very impressive. I want to start talking about training philosophy and some
Yeah.
things like that. And it's always a hard thing to put into words. So one thing maybe to start it off, who would you say have been I know where you're going to go for some of this, so forgive the question a little bit, but who would you say have been like your biggest mentors or your biggest influences in how you write training and how you train your people?
Yeah, and I think the biggest learnings I've had as a coach is actually being coached myself. Like during my first couple of years, I had a coach here in Sweden, Patrik Andersson, which is a fun guy. Then, of course, you sort of learn being on the other side of that process. Both as an athlete, you learn about yourself and lifting, but foremost as a coach. Uh, so I learned quite a bit during that time. Then I took some time on my own just to try things and figure out things myself as well. And then I worked with yourself, Mike, for many years. And I think the biggest learning from that is when I started working with you, it was a lot closer to the sort of core strength training principles. So maybe previously I was a bit more focused on building the optimal program or building a method for success and so on. But when we work with emerging strategies, everything we do is so tightly connected to sort of the core strength training principles of training sufficiently hard, sufficiently specific, getting progressive overload, and facing everything appropriately. So that sort of turned things around for me. Instead of focusing, on the program, I started focusing on the principles of strength training, and that has helped a lot.
Cool. That's gonna get into there's so many different follow-up questions that I want to ask there, but kind of putting things in the right order is sometimes a little tricky. There's always a kind of a special place in my heart, and I say all the time, for people who self-coach. Like self-coaching is difficult to do, but it's such a cool learning experience. And it's cool to hear you talk about like that being a formative time in your own development and the development of how you see training, even now. Let me try to sharpen things up a bit. One thing that I hear said a lot with regard to Gustav and Gustav's training is that a lot of what gets posted and what gets seen anyway is very submaximal.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I guess the first question is that representative? Is that a strategy that you really is that accurate for his training? And is that a pattern that you see more broadly with lots of your athletes, or is that something that's specific to?
I think it's hard what we compare to when we say submaximal in comparison to, for example, other lifters, because probably Gustav's Instagram is probably the most transparent of any any lifters. Usually, a lot of lifters just want to post their top set or when they break a PR, but Gustav, he will post 5 reps at 250 kilos during a deload because he wants to show sort of the training process. But speaking of how heavy we usually go with Gustav, is that okay? If we look at the period between Worlds and Sheffield, we really hit or close to maximum attempts for singles one time, sort of as a checkpoint in between the competitions. During the rest of the time, we want to have as much recovery potential left as possible for the work that we know actually works for Gustav. So we don't usually take the risk of overreaching on really low reps because he gets so centrally fatigued that we risk losing out on 1-2 weeks of training ahead. But we do push really heavy during some weeks. So even though he doesn't lift max attempts in training, especially not really close to competition because that's too big of a risk in terms of fatigue. I can promise you that he trains hard and he trains harder than a lot of other lifters.
There's definitely different ways of going about training hard too, and having done some higher volume, lower RPE programs, that's it's a whole different kind of hard. Jason Tremblay and Ben Escrow with the strength guys, they talk about that as well. I remember talking to them about, they tend not to, I don't know if it's still this way. At the time, they tended not to program too many top sets. So it wasn't so much like working up to a top set and then back offs. It was more like a static load sets across type of format. And I remember talking to them, and their opinion was like, look, this is a different kind of hard to maintain that kind of output for multiple sets, to show the discipline and restraint not to load it up on your first set and to continue having that output for many sets. Yeah, so I can get behind that idea. And the thing that you're doing is leading to improvements in strength, and that's the main point, right?
Yeah, and that's sort of the key. And of course, we have tried different things in the past. Now we have worked together since 2017, and at this stage, we are super confident in what we should do far from competition, and we're super confident in what works leading up to competition, especially leading up to Sheffield. Before we have just still been sort of in the trial and error space, especially for the deadlifts. But we are confident in what delivers a good peak for Gustav.
Yeah. So that's interesting as well. Like I always take that as a sign of a good coach who's like living in the coaching trenches when you start talking about risk and risk management. That's such a real thing. That there's the thing that might be best on paper even, but in real life there's risks associated with these things, and to come into the competition healthy is a big deal at high
Yeah.
levels. It's easy to do when you're 20 years old, or something. But then as you go further along, it gets harder and harder to do, and higher level as well. Was that did you guys have any sort of hang-ups or anything as you progressed toward the Sheffield? Did you have injuries that you had to manage?
Yeah, we had to manage a chest injury, or it's more connected to some tightness in the biceps tendon and around the chest area. So we had to be really careful with bench the last 3 weeks or so. But I think Gustav was in a really good place mentally to handle this leading into the competition. He was confident in that, okay, this is not like a real physical injury. He will have pain and we won't be able to train as much. But if we just keep it up, we know that his baseline ability will still be around like 212 to 215, even if we train bench once a week. Going back to risk management, we'd rather keep that level than trying to reach for something that's not realistic in order to get to 17 to 20 that we know Gustav has done 221 in training. So if everything were perfect, we would have pushed the bench more, but we wouldn't take the risk of missing out extra kilos for that small reward.
Yeah.
I feel like you just brought up a really interesting point when talking about baseline strength, because this is something that can, when an athlete is dealing with an injury and is going to work towards an important competition, this is something that you can always rely to, and
Yeah.
it can give you confidence leading up to the competition. So, and it also reminds me of something that you recently posted about Gustav's training, because you're working with different blocks, or let's say
Yeah.
phases. So
Yeah.
you have the building phase, you have the develop phase, and then you have the peak phase. How do you know what the baseline is like? Is this something that you see that Gustav is performing on a regular basis in the building phase, or how does it work?
Well, especially from the development and peak phase. And just to elaborate a bit more on the different phases there. Like the build phase, we focus more on building muscle mass, increasing working capacity, or handling prehab or rehab. So that's quite far from competition. In the development phase, we want to teach these muscles how to lift some heavy ass weights. And in the peak, it's all about maximizing performance potential leading up to competition. During the build phase, we don't really look too much into estimated 1 rep maxes and so on, because we usually do higher reps. It's a bit harder to translate and so on. So we look more at, okay, how much volume can we accumulate without having too much fatigue, and how much can we push the hypertrophy. So that during that phase, we don't really look into the sort of the baseline strength. But as soon as we get into development block or peak block, we get good reliable training data from his RP ratings, which we calculate estimated 1 rep max from, and from velocity tracking of the lifts as well. So we know that, okay, even like 1-2 weeks into a development phase, he will be close to benching to 10 to 15, and then it just goes up from there. So
Do you tend to keep the competition exercises in your build phases, or do you get away from them entirely?
I tend to keep them, and well, it's fun to do the competition exercises. We do run higher reps, of course, not as high as so that
How
it
high do you
gets
get?
usually not higher than 6 reps in the competition
Okay.
style for most lifters, and this is basically because, okay, you want to do the competition style because it's a specific exercise, but if you have too high reps or too low load, it's not really specific anymore. Then you can do other variations instead that does gets you at much fatigue per rep performed the competition exercises.
Yeah, that makes sense. It keeps it fairly specific in the times that you're going to do the competition lifts, and then
Yeah,
when that's not the best tool for the job, you find something else. That makes a
yeah,
lot of sense. Yeah.
and it's and foremost, people want to set goals in the competition lifts, even if you're doing 5-6 reps. It's good just to have something to aim for, to get those 6 rep PR or something. So
100%. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But it also just makes a lot of sense to me that you have those building phases, for example, so that you have something that you can build on afterwards. Because nowadays we see it a lot. For example, there's athletes that work well with running, for example, let's say singles at 8 all year round. But there's also other lifters. When you do that with them, they just tend to run against the wall, you know? So it just feels like you're squeezing out a lemon and you keep squeezing it, but at some point there's nothing that really keeps coming out of it.
yeah,
Um, so, and when we are talking about having this golden microcycle where you also like have a microcycle and it works really well for an athlete, how much do you tend to change that? Like, let's say in Gustav's case, during the building phase, because at the same time, when you know that something works for him, isn't it also kind of a risk if you shift too much away from that?
Yeah. So this is something I usually plan in these kind of distinct blocks for two reasons, basically, because it's very straightforward and it works very well. Uh, and the other reason is that it's easy to communicate the intent to the lifters as well and the goals of the different blocks. So they can focus their attention on the right things in different periods. But with that said, you don't. Well, I always get a bit unsure if you really have periodis. I can't say. I'm stumbling on the word. That you actually
Periodize.
have to have these different phases, as you say. If it works, it works, and if it works for a long time, why don't run with it for a long time until you see signs that it doesn't work, or until you see signs that this might be detrimental to your long-term development and so on. But if you find a microcycle that you can run, you can see that the athlete is both putting on muscle mass, and both getting more proficient in different lifts, and it's staying injury-free. Why not run with it as as long as it works? So,
The only thing that I guess a rationale that I've come across lately that would push me toward a kind of phase cycling would be that, especially say you're training a powerlifter for a powerlifting competition, you know that you want to end up training with some fairly high intensity. It can sometimes be a risk to ramp up that intensity too quickly, whether we're talking about the peak intensity or the average intensity for the block. So if you're further away and having good results with low intensity approaches, that's fine. But just kind of keeping in mind, if you spend a lot of time on that, then you may not have the time to ramp up the intensity to where you would like to be prior to competing. Or if you do ramp it up faster, then that sometimes carries some risk with it. Again, different people can handle that risk, and you may go through that and just be fine. Depends on kind of where you're at in your lifting career. How
yeah.
resilient is the athlete? It's interesting to hear the different takes on that question as well. Some people are fine running multiple blocks that are quite similar,
Yeah.
and then other people have different preferences. So it may be one of those things that either comes down to personal preference, or maybe it doesn't impact things as much as we would like to believe. Yeah. So let's, I suppose, shift back toward training Gustav and you
Yep.
and your preparation for Sheffield. You mentioned that you've been working with Gustav since 2017, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That's pretty awesome. You
Yeah.
guys have been working together for that long.
Yeah, and like as you're always a bit honored when lifters entrust you with their training, especially lifters that put a lot of heart into their goals, and the powerlifting journey means a lot to them. Then it's a sort of a big responsibility. So having someone that has been with you for that many years is of course an honor. And then Gustav, of course, is a very good friend of mine. We danced all night during at my wedding this summer, and
That's
went out
great.
for steak dinner after Sheffield last week, and so on. So it means a lot that he puts his trust in me. So that means a lot.
Did you guys know each other prior to starting to work together, or you kind of
Uh,
became friends over time?
yeah, we started working out at the same gym. So then we became friends over time, and he at that time he sort of did his own thing. And of course he was a talent. You can't total 895 if you're not a talented lifter. But sort of when we started training together, we sort of started to tweak his training more. firstly more like, okay, we talked over the gym, have you tried this, and so on. And then I actually started writing his program as well, and then it just went from there.
Yeah. Did you identify him as being a kind of a special talent early on, or was it just like, yeah, we'll see where this goes. This guy, he might like powerlifting. You know, I mean, of course, he seemed
Yeah,
more
yeah,
talented than average probably right away. But
yeah.
did you foresee that it would go this far?
Yeah, as you mentioned, if you see a 18-year-old deadlift 300 kilos, then of course they are talented.
Yeah.
But like with every young lifter, you never know how far they will go. Because like if you're talented and start lifting, you can train really hard and get really strong. To become an even better lifter, you have to train hard and you have to train smart as well. But to become the best lifter in the world, you have to train hard and you have to train smart for over a bunch of years. And during those years, you will probably be faced with a lot of challenges. You will probably be faced with injuries. You will win some competitions, you will lose some competitions. Things will happen in your life, things will happen with your family. Uh, there will be a lot of obstacles um, along the way that you might not see when you're 1-2 years into powerlifting. And you can plan for some of these things. However, some of these things will just punch you in the face, and you have to sort of grow from that and get better from that. And every lifter doesn't do that. Gustav has done it really well, uh, but you never know those kind of things with young lifters.
I
Do
feel
you
like that
think?
also helps you to become a better athlete, you know, like people only see the performance, like the numbers that you put on the platform, but actually getting to know yourself better when life hits you in the face makes you better, and that's going to help you to progress as well in training afterwards. It's really valuable. It's life lessons basically, and they transfer over to the platform afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. And it takes a lot of heart for someone like Gustav who's been, is it 3 times he's been second place at Worlds? Just sort of having the taste of the gold almost, but not quite yet there yet. But still, always putting in the effort in training, always dedicating himself to recovery and nutrition and so on. And yeah, some lifters wouldn't be able to handle that after one silver medal, but doing it after three, that takes a lot of heart.
Yeah. How long has it been a goal of of yours, for him to go to Sheffield?
Well, I think previously Gustav's main goal has not just been to win worlds, of course, and so I think he's been sort of aiming for that because that's usually the stepping stone to Sheffield. But he got the Sheffield spot before he actually won worlds. But we actually got a hint from Pete after his World Championships performance that he sort of could start prepping for Sheffield because it's very likely that he will get a spot. And from that moment, Gustav has been super dialed in on giving it his best shot.
Yeah. Did you guys do anything different in this prep, or is it just more focused and more of the stuff that you'd already discovered?
Well, as mentioned, we were already quite confident in what works for his squat. For his bench, he's had this chest injury for going a bit back and forth. So the main thing we did there was to sort of try to play it as safe as possible and not aggregate it. Um, but I think the sort of biggest development for Gustav the last couple of years has been his deadlift, both from a consistent standpoint, but also the sort of brute strength he has in the deadlift, and that's sort of always been on the table. That we have tried to sort of to perfect his starting position and his positioning. but also to get a really strong hip hinge, because he has a lot of leg strength, but he has always struggled with sort of locking out the weights and keeping the bar close enough to his body when he gets to the lockout. So that's sort of always been something we've been working on, and we've been doing it for years. It's just this past competition that the hip hinge strength has finally caught up, because you sort of move your maximum strength barrier all the time. But usually the strength that comes naturally, such as his leg strength, it moves the same at the same speed. But now finally the hip hinges has picked up, and that's what we saw on Sheffield as well. They're really strong deadlift.
Yeah. So as you're getting ready for this competition, you're exploring something on the deadlift, but for the most part, the squat and the bench are relying on things that you have a high certainty that they're going to work. I mean, you're prepping for a major competition like this, so of course, Gustav is focused, you're focused, and you guys are
Yeah.
doing things that you need to do. Um, was that just a positive thing throughout this prep? Like that increased focus, that was all for the better? Or sometimes that kind of pressure can have some negative side effects as well. Did you
Yeah.
notice any of that?
Yeah, I understand what you mean, but in this case, it was really positive.
That's awesome.
Gustav was he was very honored to be invited to Sheffield,
Yeah.
and like you're competing against the best of the best. So even if you place 12, you're still one of the absolute best lifters in the world. So he was very honored to go, and he focused a lot on his performance. He didn't look too much in what other lifters were doing, and that didn't stress him at all. He solely focused on his performance, and we could just see how far that would go. So he was very confident in his ability, but he didn't really care if that gave him fifth place or if that gave him first place. Of course, it's it's nicer to place first with a 895 total, but I think Gustav would have been very happy if he did 895 and placed fifth as well.
So as you guys were getting ready for this, there's a lot of pressure on you as well as the coach
It
to
is. It is.
make the right calls and things like that. There's the preparation. Well, before we move on from the last topic, I do want to say that that speaks to the benefit of having somebody like you in his corner. It can be really easy for lots of driven athletes to push things too hard,
Yeah.
and especially athletes in his kind of position. I see that as being a problem more often than it's more often the problem of doing too much than not doing
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
So to have somebody who says, look, we're in the peaking phase now, we need to emphasize recovery, even if that means doing less, even if that means holding back. It's not worth the risk to chase this extra 2.5 kilos on the bench. We're going to maybe come in 2.5 kilos lighter on the bench, but we'll come in healthy and not down 10 kilos. So it's really beneficial to have somebody like you in his corner, I'm sure. But then as you guys are preparing for this competition, what's going through your mind? Like what's the preparation like for you as you're getting ready to go to Sheffield? Do you have expectations around placing? Are you kind of game planning out different scenarios? Like that prep like?
Yeah, so of course we do quite a bit of scouting as well. So I put together sort of a cheat sheet in what I expected all the lifters to do at their top end, at their realistic end, and so on. And of course, but so that's sort of a reference. Okay, how should we set up the competition for Gustav? And when we looked at that, we sort of realized, okay, there's no chance of winning if we don't go 8 or 9 for 9. So that makes our strategy that we should get out of with a subtotal of 6 out of 6 lifts, and then we'll just see for the deadlifts. So that sort of set the frame of how much risk should we take in the squat and the bench press. And then, like Gustav and I, since we have trained for so many years together, we track every set using RPE, and we track at least most of the heavy sets with the velocity tracker as well. So we had quite firm projections of what Gustav was good for leading into the competition, and like all the data points suggested that okay, his squat max potentials should be between 325 and 330. And he ended with 325 and could probably have done 327.5 as well. The bench, we didn't focus too much on the numbers here. We know that 215 is something around his baseline. But for the deadlift, we were a bit more in the dark because, as mentioned, this hasn't been the most reliable lift in competition. So we didn't have like the as strong data that suggested that he was good for a particular weight. We had a notion that he could probably pull 350 based on his previous lifts. That data probably didn't stand up because we had done those improvements with the hip hinge, and that wasn't a bottleneck for his performance anymore. So we didn't really know what to expect. But if you looked at Gustav's smile when he realized he only had to pull 355, he was fairly confident that he could pull 355 and more probably. So my
How
number said 350, but I didn't tell Gustav that because he said 360, and he was probably more right than I was.
But how transparent were you actually with him with the whole game plan? Because I can imagine, like, when you already know as a coach, okay, ideally he has to go 8 out of 9 or 9
Yeah.
out of 9, and imagine during squats, and he knows it. He let's say he doesn't make a squats, and then it kind of puts a pressure on him, especially knowing that maybe deadlifts aren't the most reliable lift for him. And
Yeah.
also, did he want to know a lot about the game plan?
Well, I didn't like put it to him that okay, this is what we have projected based on these numbers, blah 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 blah. Because usually when you talk to athletes, it's better not to keep it that advanced, even though they understand the numbers they are looking at and so on. They usually have sort of a notion of what they can do and what they want to do. So I want to hear that before I put any numbers in their face. So of course I listened in what Gustav thought he was good for. And if he says like, oh, I think I can do 327.5, then that's within my projections. I'm like, yeah, that's the perfect weight. That's what we're going to aim for. But of course, if we see a risk that it can affect the total, maybe we take 325. So, but 327 would be the optimal weight. For bench, it wasn't that much of a discussion, and for deadlift, it's usually we'll see what the other ones pull, but we had sort of a top end. If we need to pull more than this, maybe we won't go for it. So, but something that we were really clear on was that okay, we need a lot of lifts to be a contender.
So, I mean, of course, you want to place as high as you can. He wasn't, if I remember correctly, he wasn't really in a tight running for any individual lift records. So that made the sole focus building the best total that you can.
Yeah, and I think he sort of have inched closer and closer on the squat record. I think was it
Yeah, it's pretty close.
331 before Gavin and Carlos beat it. But if they weren't showing up to the competition, maybe he had been a bit more eager to go for it. But I think he had already, he had sort of left that because he knew Gavin and Carlos would go for it.
Yeah, the competition shapes the landscape for sure.
Yeah.
So that's pretty wild that, I mean, sounds like you knew that there's a possibility that you come out near the top. We kind of don't know. So we're going to squat as much as we can, bench as much as we can, and see what we need to pull, and see if that's within the realm of possibility.
And I think usually when people talk about powerlifting competition, they try to make the strategy so complex. Like,
Yeah.
oh, we are going to do this and that and so on. But like, okay, squat as much as you can, bench as much as you can, and then see what you need to pull to win.
Yeah,
Usually not that much more complex.
if you do that, then there's not much else you can do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
The hard
yeah,
part is picking that right weight. That's the bigger challenge.
yeah, that's a superpower that some people have, I'm convinced. That's really cool. So, you did that essentially. You squatted great, bench went great. You come into deadlifts. So, what are you thinking? As you're looking at the scoreboard at that point, like, and Gabby kind of mentioned already. Do you communicate kind of everything to Gustav as you guys are going through this, or you want him to just focus on the lifting and you're thinking more about numbers?
Well, uh, he trusts me to put in the right number. So the only thing we need to be clear about is that we wanted to sort of be on the same page. Okay, we won't go over this weight if that puts the risk of placing lower. So that's like the only communication we needed regarding the weights, and then he trusted me to put in whatever places us the best for the first and for the second and for the third. But going into deadlifts, I started to realize, okay, this could actually go really well. So we started to get our hopes up, and leading into like the third deadlifts, it was such a complex competition to coach. And
I can
like usually
imagine.
you just have to look at like one lifter. We have to lift more than this lifter. But now you have to look at 11 different lifters, and you have to calculate percentages as you go. And it was a quite small room where you left the attempt selections, and it was quite crowded in there and so on. So so yeah, I
So
don't know
are
how
you
many
standing there
times I
with like
calculated.
are you sitting there with like a pencil and paper and a calculator, or did you like build some spreadsheet for this? Like you're right, you've got to not only figure out what is this person good for, but figure out what
Yeah.
percentage of the world record is that.
Yeah, so I had sort of a cheat sheet table with the totals in the different weight classes,
Mhm.
and then I could just see if okay, um, if Tim pulls this, we need to pull this. If Jesus does this, we need to do this, and so on. So I had that prepared on beforehand, but like you start to doubt yourself, is this really the correct weight and so on, and then you put up a calculator and yeah, okay, we're good. And I had Carolina Arvidsson, the Swedish coach as well over Messenger, so she could sort of double check the numbers, and she sent it to me as well. This is what I think so. She helped on a distance as well during the deadlift because
That's
yeah,
amazing.
it's a lot of numbers.
That's amazing. It's a good person to have in your corner as well.
It is. It is.
Yeah. That's that's awesome, man. So as he's going out for his third pull, you're thinking what?
Well, I think I didn't really sort of grasp the moment quite yet that this was actually going to to go all the way. I was quite confident in 355. But as mentioned, the deadlift haven't been the most consistent in competition before. But just looking at Gustav's confidence, looking at his previous deadlifts this day, I was like, I started to realize that he was actually going to pull this. And it was and that would place him in first place for the moment. So yeah, it was a bit confusing. I didn't really grasp it quite yet, and I think it took some time for Gustav to sort of understand that he had won as well. Like,
Yeah,
to,
when would you say that sunk in completely? When did you know that, yeah, we've got this?
well, I started to celebrate as he pulled his last deadlift because, like in the moment, I felt quite confident that would be enough. But sort of as soon as I stepped off the platform, I was like, oh yes, Jesus is still going to lift. You never know how this is going to go.
Yeah, maybe
And
somebody
I was
puts in a big
focusing on
number.
Gustav, so I didn't see Jesus lifts. I just knew he had to lift a lot of weight. So
Yeah, that's really cool. And so, because you come across so, I think, calm in demeanor, especially, you know, and granted, it's been, more than a little bit since this competition, but what is that? What is that like for you and for Gustav? You guys are back there and you realize, hey, we actually pulled this off. you know. Uh,
yeah, I think it's just starting to settle in.
mhm.
We went out to celebrate last week to a really nice steak place here in Sweden that's very well known. And during that, we sort of realized, okay, he's the champion of champions.
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest thing you can win in powerlifting. So I think it's good to have those moments after competition when you celebrate as well, because I find myself as an athlete, and I find especially many high achieving athletes that they just want to go back to training, and then you sort of forget to celebrate the moment and enjoy it, because I think that's important for the process as well to celebrate when things have been going really well, and not just get back to the gym. You can do both.
Well, yeah, what a really important point. And I think that's true in a lot of different cases too, like you may you may be like a intermediate level competitor and set a personal best at some competition, and it's easy to go, did it. Now back to training. Well,
Next
you
goal.
know, yeah, I mean, yeah, I like the idea of being able to do both. Like, yeah, you get back to the gym and there's a satisfaction in that too. But then also to look at yourself in the mirror the next morning and be like, yeah, I did that. I'm the strongest version of myself, then there's value in taking that time along the way as well. So I really like that you guys did that, and that, even if it's been, a couple weeks, what has it been, a month yet since Sheffield?
uh,
Maybe not quite.
3-4 weeks.
Yeah. Um, that, we're not moving past it too quickly here, like it's a
Yeah,
big deal.
yeah.
It's a big deal for him. It's a big deal for you, and to take some time to savor is really important. So next up, I guess, is the World Championship, and that's one that Gustav has wanted for a while.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah, yeah. He wants it. He wants it. But
As
at the
anyone
same
would.
time, like Gustav is very focused on both trying to win, but foremost focused on trying to improve and doing whatever he can do to win. You never know who's going to show up to the competition. If someone shows up and do 940, like you should still be extremely proud of yourself if you increase 10, 15 kilos in your total. So it's about focusing and setting goals both for yourself and for the placing. So
Man, there's so much to be learned from that kind of mindset. There's so much there. I mean, in fact, I have a question here that, what advice do you have for aspiring lifters and coaches? I mean, I'll let you answer it for yourself, but if I'm gonna steal an answer, it would be that. That would be a takeaway I would really encourage people to lean into, is just to focus on your performance, improve your own performance, and get better, and that's your controllable.
yeah, yes, it is. But well, for this, maybe I would give two advice. One being that, okay, you need to find your motivation. Some people
Mm.
get really motivated by winning a competition. Some people get really motivated by just improving as an athlete. Some people get motivated by both, but it's about finding what motivates you and what motivates you in the moment, and make that into hard work, and make that into dedicated recovery and so on. So that would be the first advice. Use both and use them during the right time. And the second advice is just going back to what I said earlier. Okay, if you're a beginner, you can train smart or you can train hard, and that will get you to sort of the intermediate level. To get to intermediate, from intermediate to a high level, you need to do both. You need to both train hard and you need to train smart as well. But to really become the best, you need to do that over an extended period of time. And there will be a lot of challenges as you go. So you really need to learn from those and grow from those. So you could keep doing this because even for the most talented lifter, it's many years before you reach the world stage. And for most lifters, it's a decade. It took a decade for me to win worlds, and I would put in another decade if needed to do it again.
Get that right.
Yeah, I feel like this is the kind of stuff that a lot of people actually don't want to hear. Um, yeah, I've heard it from many people already, like, be in the business for 10 years and then we'll see. So keep putting in the work. Of course, you always have those rising stars, like the freaks that
Yeah,
show up
yeah.
out of nowhere, and you can't really control that. But you can definitely always control being consistent and mindful. And I feel like it's also really important for athletes to choose wisely who you have in your corner and build that relationship. Because if you have a coach and you've been working with them, with the coach for a long time, you kind of also can let go and just put in the trust. And it's also just really nice to
Yeah.
have a team that you can have fun with. So because you spend a lot of time in the gym, in training, and having someone in your corner that, yeah, makes the journey more enjoyable is really nice.
And Alex, it's always good to compare notes with you. Yeah, like hear about, especially when you're doing such big things here. I guess before we wrap things up, I just wanted to give you a minute to talk about anything else that you wanted to talk about. That you're obviously coaching people, and if if I remember correctly, you've got an ebook now.
Yeah. So I do coach people, as mentioned. I focus a lot of on the core strength training principles and adapt that according to the needs of the athlete. So,
Yeah.
but if you like the reactive training systems approach, my methods are by default very similar. So, if you do enjoy the RTS approach and emerging strategies, and want to learn more about my take on it, please feel free to reach out regarding any coaching queries. And if you're interested in more detailed view on Gustav Hedlund's training leading up to Sheffield, I've just released the full 16-week program that he followed leading up to Sheffield, with an in-depth ebook, 19 pages, where we walk through the training approach and how Gustav won Sheffield 2024.
That's awesome. I'm definitely gonna check that out. I'm a training nerd, so I check
Yeah,
most
I'll
stuff
send it to you.
out. And always good to, like I said, compare notes with you and chat with you about these things. Thanks for sharing and letting us have a peek behind the scenes as well.
Great.
Thanks, Gaby.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for watching and listening, and we'll see you all next time.